Can anybody hear me? You hear me good? All right. Let's get over here. 8 is my screen. Make sure that looks okay. Come on, 8. Come on, 8. All right. Is that big enough? Does that look okay? All right. Let's just do one thing. Get out of that theme. There we go. Okay. All right. Let's get started. PowerPoint 5 clicker. Hi. All right. My name is Chris Dias. I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio Code team. And so today we're going to talk about some tips and tricks, and then some new stuff that we're going to talk about, which is remote development, which we didn't have on the agenda when we sort of published these things because they just came out a couple days ago. So raise, how long have you been using VS Code? For less than 6 months? Ooh, less than a year? Since it started. All right, excellent. So people who don't use VS Code in here, is there any? Oh, okay. All right, that's good. All right, so tips and tricks. We're going to go through a few things here. It's kind of a laundry list. There's a lot of things you can do in VS Code. There's a lot of settings, so we're going to try to pull them all together. We're going to talk about customizing the environment. We're going to do a little warm-up. We're going to start with some themes, and then we're going to go into some code editing and code navigation tips and tricks that you can use. A little bit on mastering the terminal, because the terminal is a key part to how Visual Studio Code works. Actually, we're going to talk about debugging before we talk about automating jobs with tasks. So we'll show you a pretty cool set of things you can do with debugging. And we'll use a set of tasks to be able to sort of help in your whole debugging end-to-end experience. And then we'll finish it up, or they'll spend the last 15 or 20 minutes maybe on doing remote development with VS Code. Anybody here SSH into a machine? Anybody use WSL? Anybody use containers? All right, so that'd be good. What? I heard something? Question? Okay, so let's get started. I got a set of slides here. So the slides are available for download after. I'm not going to go through each one of these slides. We'll kind of spend most of our time in the tool instead of looking at the slides. Let's get back over to VS Code. All right, we're going to go to 8. And we're going to start off by customizing our environment. So like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a warm-up. We're going to go and do some theming. All right, so by default, you know, if you come in here to VS Code and you press F1, F1 is the key to Visual Studio Code. F1 or Command P or Shift Command P brings up what we call the command palette. And this gives you access to everything inside VS Code. This is the reason why there are not 3,000 menu items in VS Code, because all of the commands are in the command palette, and you can search and navigate them much more quickly through the keyboard. So we're going to look at the color theme, right? And so by default, there's a few themes that are installed with VS Code. You get dark theme, Kimby Dark, Monokai, Monokai Dim. These are all already installed in the tool. But if we want to go and install a new theme, what we can do is come down here and install an additional color theme. And this is going to open up the extension view on the left-hand side. Now, the first thing to note, up here in the upper left-hand corner, it says category themes. There's actually a query language up here. So if you type in @ you can actually query different parts of the marketplace right in here. So we can say category, extension packs, or language packs, or debuggers. These are all the different types of extensions that exist in the marketplace. But this one we saw, we're going to go and we're going to look for themes. Okay, so there's a lot of themes that are out there. You can scroll through them and you can see there's the One Dark Pro theme. That's interesting. If I click on install, one of the things that we've done in the past couple of releases with VS Code is made it so that once you install an extension, you don't have to reload. So when I clicked on install, that extension is installed already. There's no reload process. It's kind of interesting. You know, reloading VS Code takes, what, 3 or 4 seconds, maybe tops. But it's this little quality of life thing where people are very, very excited the fact that you don't have to reload anymore. But what happens is as soon as you do that, well, they don't have a lot of differentness. Let's bring up a file in the background here. That'll make it a little more obvious. Let's see, give me a JavaScript file. Okay, so we'll go back to the themes, and you can see here is Monokai. Which one did we install? We'll just install another one because we can. All right, so there's the themes. Material theme, we'll install this one. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of them that are actually provided as a part of this theme. And as you cycle through them, you can immediately get access to the ones that you want to go and check out and use right away. So it's almost like having the ability to just browse the marketplace for themes right inside the tool. So the light one's pretty bright. Do you like the light one or the dark one for this presentation? Light? Dark. I knew it. Thank you very much. So let's go back here. I'm going to go to my favorite one is Cobalt. Cobalt. Okay. One last other thing I want to show about the themes. There's a bunch in here that actually ship with VS Code that I talked about, like Kimby Dark, Monokai, where's it? Solarized Dark, Tomorrow Night Blue. These are all part of VS Code itself. They come in the box, so to speak, even though there really is no box. And you can actually control the extensions that ship in the box. So if you come up here in this little drop down, this little dot, 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 it's kind of like an overview hanging menu thing. You can click on that. And there's a link in here. It says show built-in extensions. And this will actually show you all of the extensions that we bundle together and ship with VS Code. Because what we try to do with VS Code is build it through a set of extension points. So a lot of the features that you see in VS Code that ship with it actually are packaged up and put on disk as extensions. So the first thing you see at the top, all the programming languages, these are all the basic editing experiences that you get out of the box for languages, so like colorization, things like that. You don't get full-on like Python support out of the box. That's an extension you install otherwise. But you have the ability to come in here, and if you want to turn them off, you can come in here and get rid of, I don't know, Emmet if you don't like Emmet. But we like Emmet. We're going to show that a little bit later, so we're not going to turn that off. But you can come in here, and here's all the themes that ship with a product. I can just say, all right, I don't want the Monokai one, and I can disable it. And then it'll no longer show up on the theme list. So there's no Monokai in here. Well, is Monokai dimmed? Maybe I installed that one. But the point is that you can go and you can kind of control what's available to you in the environment by looking at some of the built-in extensions that are there. The other thing that's great for is it actually shows you some of the features that are there that maybe you didn't know about to begin with. Okay, so that's the warm-up on themes. That was pretty easy. The thing I want to do next is take a look at settings. So I'm going to press Command-B. Command-B will toggle the bar on the left-hand side, or if you have it positioned on the right side, it'll toggle that. And then what I'm going to do is press Command-Comma. And Command-Comma is going to bring up the settings. Now, since I started working on VS Code before VS Code was VS Code, I personally like to have the JSON file in my settings, but I'll show you how to change that. So a few things in here, let me zoom in just a little bit more so you can see. A few things that I thought would be interesting to show in my settings file, and I should actually put this up on just somewhere that people can look at it. It kind of shows a lot of the features of the product. So first things first, if I'm doing a demo, what I do is I set something called update mode to none. And what happens is I'm running the insider's build of Visual Studio Code. This gets updated every night, sometimes twice a day if we run into a really bad issue that we need to do. And if I'm going to do a demo, I really don't want to get prompted to update the tool when I reinstall. Or if I get prompted and I reload, I don't want it to update. So I can shut off automatic updates coming into VS Code by just changing that update mode equals to none. And when I'm ready to get updates again, I can turn it back on. Similarly with extensions. So my extensions will automatically check for updates and install themselves. And now if I'm working with maybe a pre-release version of an extension and there's a new one up there, it will go and check and it will replace it. So I can turn those off if I need to, which I wasn't doing here, so it's still on. Now I said that I really like the JSON file, but you can control which comes up first. So this setting, workbench settings.editor, if you come in here in any one of these settings, you can always press control space and it'll give you IntelliSense and completions. And so what we can do here is we say, all right, actually I really like the UI. So if we close this, let me close a couple things down here. We come back and we hit Command-Comma, then we'll go back to the UI. This is the new UI that we've implemented over the past few months. And so this is sort of the richer environment for setting settings. An interesting thing about this is if you come up here to the top, if you know what you're doing, if you say, auto save, it'll find it directly. But let's say you don't know what you're doing, right? You don't know exactly what you're looking for. We actually have this hooked up to a natural language search query that's powered by Bing, so I could put in something like, move bar to the right. And that you'll see like a little bit of a pause, and then you'll see the results that are coming back from the internet, from Bing, that will sort of help you find what you're looking for. So sidebar location, that's actually the thing that I was looking for. So if I do that, then you can see that my sidebar that we hid before, Command-B, whatever, is actually now on the right-hand side. Now we can't leave it that way because that to me is like working upside down. Okay, So if you ever want to get back to the JSON, up here in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little set of brackets. You click on that, and you're back into the JSON file. So I'm going to put this back to JSON so that I'm a little more comfortable. A few interesting things here. Smooth caret animation. If I move the caret around, this will actually run quite smoothly. If you set it to false, you'll see a little bit more chunkiness as you move the cursor around. All right? So it's a nice, smoother experience that I like to have. So we'll change that back. Indent guides, you can see over here on the left-hand side, I've got indent guides for the nice, shows me where all my indents are. This is an interesting one. This is where render whitespace comes in. I have it set to boundary, and there are 3 different things that you can set here: all, boundary, or none. And if I set it to all, I'll show you what happens. We'll zoom in very closely here. You can see that in between every single word or space, there's a little dot, right? You can see it's all spaces. It'll show that to you. To me, that's a little bit overwhelming. I prefer just to see it on the boundary. Did I spell it right? No, I didn't. So we'll just press Control Space, boundary, and you can see the spaces or the little dots between all the spaces go away. And only what I'm seeing is what's at the beginning of the line. So that's a thing that I prefer. Minimap enabled. I don't actually like to have the minimap on in my source code, so you can turn that off. There's a thing that you can do, though. Let's go down here. We'll find this to Markdown. You can set settings on a particular file type. So in this case, for Markdown files, I have 2 settings that I want to have. One is that I want quick suggestions to be off. That means that even as I'm typing in a Markdown file, which is just text, I don't want to see that completion list that just has every word in the file. To me, I find that distracting. But I do, for some reason, I don't know why, really like the minimap in my Markdown files. So you can create settings that are specific for a particular language type. All right, let's go back up here to the top. This is very big. Font ligatures. Everybody use the font ligatures? Everybody know what a font ligature is? All right, just a few people. I'll show you what font ligatures are by turning it off first. So we'll set this to false. False. And I'm going to bring up a, I got to zoom out just a little bit, sorry. I'm going to bring up, let's see, JSON file. No, that's not a good one. Let's do it again. A JavaScript file, let's see, what? Index, that's a good one. Okay, so if I came in here to this file and I did something like if, we'll say const x equals hello. And I say if x equals, whatever, I get the 3 equal signs. It's kind of boring, it could be prettier. So what we can do is back over here in our settings, we can say that we actually want to use font ligatures. And if we do that, and we go back over to our file, you can actually see we have a nice pretty 3-bar equal sign, triple equal sign. If I say not equals, then I get the not equals with a slash through it. Now what this requires is a particular font that supports font ligatures. And so there are a handful of those. Fear Code is one of them, the one that I really like. And you can just go find that on the internet and install it. And you get all these nice font ligatures, fat arrows, skinny arrows, things like that. Multi-cursor modifier, you can change which key you want to have to support multi-cursors. So in my case, I've got command. So when I press the command key and I click, then I get multiple cursors throughout my file. Okay, copy with syntax highlighting. True, which is the default. So if you've ever done this, you copied a block of code, and you went over to email, and hopefully the right piece of email is going to come up. Whew, it did, blank. And you pasted it in here, and you get the full formatting of that particular theme that you're inside VS Code. And if you're a dark theme and you're pasting into email, maybe you don't want to have that particular formatting. So what you can do is actually turn that off. So if we set that back to false, and we copy some code again, press Control-C, go back here, and then whoops, hey, what happened? Copy with syntax highlighting, false. Maybe I was just too quick for it. There we go. All right, so then you get sort of the old traditional style of copy and paste of just plain text. All right, a few more things in here in settings before we move on to the next customization. Let's see, a couple other things. All right, the workbench. So we were talking about the editor. The editor is the core part of VS Code. This is sort of the thing that we started with. The workbench then is everything that surrounds the editor. So then when you start to see things under the workspace namespace in settings, you know where they take effect. Autosave, I have autosave on after a second, and you can control when it actually happens. So I can come in here and I could say, well, I want it after a delay, which would then apply to the 1,000 milliseconds or a second. I can turn it off, but two other things I can do. I can say on focus change, and so that will autosave a file when I change editors inside VS Code. So if you're working on a file, it's not going to autosave continually until you go and you change editors. On window change means that I move off of VS Code onto another instance of VS Code or some other app that's running on my machine. So you have a finer grained control over when autosave would happen. File associations. File associations lets you associate a glob pattern for a file name in your workspace with a particular file type. And so in this case, what I'm saying is that if I've got any file that's named Dockerfile_star, anything like that, it's going to know that it's a Docker file. Because there's no file extension for Docker files, you have to kind of create these patterns. OK, so that's how you can do that with file associations. A couple other things in here. Close empty editor groups. If you've ever gone and split a file in 2 or in 3, and you like to have this environment that's kind of set up, you've got 3 columns, or you split things in half, which you can actually hold down the Alt key. If you hold down the Alt key and you see, if I hover over in the upper right-hand corner of the split window, the Alt key will actually split it in half that way. But if I have that setting, which was close empty groups equals false, when I close a file in there, that group will stay open, right? So I can go and I can create the layout that I want, and then I can open up files into those groups over time. What happens when I get down to an empty group, it stays there. Otherwise, these groups go away, and then I have to reassemble the layout that I had created before. So I like to have that off. A couple other things. This is one of my favorites, the workbench tips enabled. Let's close this down, save that. If you come here to the desktop of VS Code, you'll notice that you have to zoom out sometimes. You notice that I don't have the key binding shortcuts underneath the icon for VS Code. So you have the ability to go in and turn those off. So if I say, on, true, and I close this file again, you can see then that, boy, I'm just getting too quick on the saving. Oops. Come on. Tips enabled, true. OK. So now we come in here, then you can see. So you have this ability to go and sort of clean up the environment, make it tight if that's the way that you want it to work. The other thing you can do here is some people, we had a lot of complaints about this. The feedback visible setting, if you look down here, the smiley face, you can actually turn that off if you want to. All right, so lots of things that you can do here inside the settings file. OK, let's close that out. One other thing that I do want to touch on. Now, I've got this font, this theme that I installed. It's called Cobalt, right? And I like most of the things about Cobalt, but there were a few things that I didn't like. And what you can do in settings is you can actually override a whole number of color settings inside the environment just by setting a few properties. So a few things that I'm doing here. So the status bar background, I'm setting this for any theme that I've got. Like if I comment it out, actually if you press Command / that will do a comment in any language that you're in. You'll notice that my status bar down the bottom went back to, it's basically dark if it's black. It's hard to see here, but it's very dark. And so what I actually like is like a lighter, bluer background, right? And that's going to apply for any particular, here it is, any theme that I've got installed. So in fact, if I come in here and I change it back to default dark, we'll go back to that. But you can see that my status bar coloring has changed down, or remained the same down at the bottom. So we'll flip it back to Cobalt, and we'll go back up here. And now you can see, similar like what I said before, we can override a bunch of settings based on a particular language. You can override settings for a particular theme. So for the Cobalt theme, there's a few things that I didn't like. So one of them was the active background of a tab, right? And so I'm going to comment that out. Let me open up a couple of other files just so you can see what I mean. So there's a few other files. Close that down. Now you can see by default here, the active tab is actually dark, and to me that looked like it was going in the background. So what I could do is set the background color of the active tab to what I like. I like the thinner border on the active tab. You can see it's a little bit thicker, but probably the most interesting thing for me was this ignore resource foreground from Git. So if I come over to the Explorer, you can see that the node modules folder is actually colored this hueish, reddish, pinkish color. To me, it looks like an error. And under this theme, that's actually showing what files or folders Git is ignoring. So I went and I changed that to make it something a little bit more ignored color, which to me is like a lighter, darker gray. So that's how you can go in and you can override and set the custom colors for your particular setting. Two other things in here I want to show you. There's a new setting that's coming in May. It's called workbench.dialogs.useSimplified. And this will blend into what we talk about with remote development in a few minutes. But what this does, if you turn this on, true, it's only in Insiders today. If you turn this on and you come up to the command palette and you say File Open, what I actually get is not the system file open dialog. I actually get a dialog that's more like the command palette. It's very, very keyboard friendly. All right, so that's the most important thing of this. So you'll be able to check that out in Insiders today or in Stable in a couple of weeks. All right, last thing I want to show in here is this thing about NPM. So this is a node application. It's pretty simple, but VS Code has some built-in functionality for node applications. And so there's a feature in here, it's called npm enable script explorer, and you can turn that on. And when you do that, you actually get a nice little sash down here at the bottom of the Explorer that gives you access to everything in your package.json. So I could do something in here like, press run, and it'll actually go and execute npm, or actually it'll use yarn, because I've specified that I want to use yarn instead of npm, and it'll go and it'll build this application for me. So I can go and turn that on, and I have very quick access to all the tasks in my workspace. The other thing you can do is you can right-click on all of these sashes, and you can hide or show them. So there's a feature in here called Outline, which I'll show in a minute. But you can right-click, and you can hide those, or you can show them. Open editors, if you've got that at the top, and maybe you don't like the fact that it jumps around a little bit, you can turn that off. So something maybe folks didn't know. OK, so that is customizing the environment. What I want to turn to now is what I want to turn to now is some navigation and customization, or navigation editing of our environment. So one thing that you saw earlier today, when I bring up the command palette, if I come in here and just press F1, you'll notice there's a little greater than sign. That brings up the command palette for all the commands that are in there. If you back up one and you press question mark, you can see all the things that you can actually do with the command palette. And by default, you can come in here and just type in file names. So if I say something like star.js, it'll search the entire workspace and show me all the JavaScript files. I can even do fuzzy searches against things like across the folder structure. So I'm looking for something in the server folder, which is where index.js is. So that's a pretty cool way to navigate your workspace. Let me come to a more interesting file here like index. The other thing I can do is back up and put in an @ an ampersand, and that will give me an overview, an outline of the entire file. And if I put a colon after that, it'll group it by type. So I get a grouping by function or variables, and then as I move up and down, I can actually navigate through the file using this model. And this is what I said before about the outline, which is over here on the left-hand side. It gives you the same view of your entire file, and you can navigate around in there. All right, so very quick access to navigating throughout your environment. Now, it's really cool that I can sort of make a lot of space and see my code, but I still have these bars on the side. I could hide them, or I could do something that we call Zen mode. So if I press Command K and then press Z, we'll actually go full screen. We'll get rid of all the adornments around VS Code, and then you can focus directly on your source code. But how do you get around the environment this way? Well, you can press Command B and keep bringing that thing back up. But we have another feature in here called breadcrumbs. And I think I have them toggle breadcrumbs. Yep, so what you can do is you go to the command palette, you say toggle breadcrumbs, and up here in the upper left-hand side, I'll zoom in a little bit, you can see we've got basically this hierarchy, which is where I am in my particular file. I can hit Command, Shift, semicolon, and that will take me up there. right? So if I move left and right arrows around, you can see that I'm jumping between these different folders and files. So if I click on server, then I have access to the workspace, so I can come in and I can say, all right, well, I want to go into server, roots, and maybe let's go to checkout.js. And once I'm in checkout.js, I can come back here, and I can even navigate now around through that file using the outline that's sort of built into breadcrumbs. All right, so that's pretty wild. And the most important thing, it's kind of like trying to get out of Vim. How you get out of Zen mode? Escape, escape. There we go. So if that's the one thing you take away today, that will be good. All right, so that's cool. One of the things that I want to show, everybody may have seen this in the keynote earlier today, is this feature called IntelliCode. So I'm going to come back here to the extension view view-let. I'm going to look for IntelliCode, which is an awesome extension that I'm going to install. Again, I don't have to recently use. Yes, I would like to change that. One of the things that we showed earlier was in the keynote demo was IntelliCode, and I want to just spend a couple minutes on that because I think it's awesome. So I've got IntelliCode installed. If I come in here and I say console dot, hey, come on IntelliCode, console dot log. Hey, why are you not working for me? Did I install it? You are installed. Maybe it's thinking. Console dot, wow, app dot, reload window. Let's give it one more shot. If not, we'll move on. App dot. There we go. It had to think a little bit. So what you're seeing at the top of the list, you get stars next to the most used things. And so what we've done with IntelliCode, we've gone and indexed hundreds, if not thousands now, of open source public repos on GitHub. And for different languages, we figured out what are the most important things that people can, or likely to go and use. So if I come in here and I say const name equals Chris, and I say if, I say name dot, the set of things that I get as suggestions at the top are based on the context that I'm in, right? And so then I can do things like replace or split. But if I come in and I say if name dot, then I get a different set of completions because I'm now in an if statement, right? So it understands where I am, and then it offers up the right suggestions for me. So I highly recommend going installing IntelliCode because basically it just becomes like air, which is really, really nice. Okay, so I talked about multi-cursor a little bit when I was showing some of the settings, and I can press, the command key and click around, and I get a whole bunch of cursors. That's interesting. But if I do something like this and I put the cursor on app, you can see that we highlight all the words that match that string. And one of the things I can do is I can press Command D. And if I press Command D, I'll start to cycle through all of those highlighted words and create cursors on each one of them. So if I've got a long set of things, I can click on it, just press Command D, and I'll pick the ones that I want. That's a little tedious, though. I prefer to even get a little bit faster. So if I came in here and I said something like, I don't know, app, or let's say set at this point. So then I did a search. Maybe I'm searching across the entire file. The other thing I can do is I can press Shift Command L, and that'll set a cursor on every single instance of that word right away. I don't have to press Command D. I know that it's going to be across the whole file. And then if I really, whoops. So then I can go and then start to use multi-cursors that way. So very, very quick. Another thing that I wanted to talk about that was a feature that we have installed in the product by default is something called Emmet. Has anybody used Emmet here? Anybody write web pages or CSS? All right, well, this is going to blow your mind. So I'm going to go create a new file in this workspace. Here's a cool thing. If I click on Create New File, I get this empty box that I can type in. Do you know that you can come in here and you can say foo-bar-my HTML file.html. And that will go and create that file in that particular folder. If the folder exists or doesn't exist, it'll go create it down at that location. So that's kind of cool. I actually learned about that on Twitter the other day. I didn't even know it was there. I admit it. It's all right. All right. Every 4 weeks, I'm the guy behind @code. Okay, so Emmet. What you can do here, Emmet is basically this shortcut. It's almost like a programming language for rapidly going and scaffolding out HTML, CSS, JSX, things like that. So if I come in here and I hit exclamation point, you'll see over on the right-hand side, I get a completion list that says Emmet abbreviation. And this is going to show me exactly what is going to get generated when I press tab. So now it's going to go, it's like a, it's like a snippet language that you can go and use. So now I've got this whole snippet that I've created from HTML page. I can toggle through those or tab through those to get to where I need to be. If I come in here and I type in something like div, as I want to create a div, but inside the div, I want to create a unordered list, and I want to create, let's see, 5 list items, and each inside one of those, I want to create a span. Oops, span. You can see everything that's going to get created by just typing in this very small amount of code. And then if I type in tab, it gets all inserted there for me. And then I can just come in here and quickly tab around and, whatever I need to do in my code. So that's kind of like the most basic introduction to Emmet. Like I said, try it out. It'll blow your mind. It'll make you extremely productive. The last thing from an editing perspective that I want to show was some recent work that we did, which was about understanding and enabling spans or scopes inside a line of code. So if I come here and I press Shift, Control, Command, and I press the right arrow, it's going to select the thing that's under the cursor, right? So it's the text that's there. If I press it again, it's going to go to the next outer block, which is the span. If I do it again, now I'm going to expand out to the list item. I do it again, it goes to the line, and then it works its way out. So if you're in a very deeply nested if statement or whatever block or function block, you can easily sort of do 2 things. 1, see where you are, and 2, scope it out so you can go and select the right amount of code. All right, so that's supported today in sort of like HTML, CSS, I think, JavaScript, and more languages will come online because the language service actually has to support it. So it's there in the basic functionality of the tool. Okay, so next thing I want to do is get into mastering the terminal. So let's close these things down. And I'm going to bring up the terminal, which is Command or Control backtick. And here's our terminal. Let's make a little bit more space. Now, a couple simple things in here. Of course, here's my default terminal. I can come over here and I can split it. I can create a couple of instances of that. So I can come over to ls. I don't know, I can run gulp here if I wanted to. So I can do a bunch of different things in here in my terminal. You'll notice that as I go and I add new terminals in here, I basically get this drop down that shows me all the terminals that are there. Let me make a little bit more space because we're zoomed in. It's a little bit hard to see. So as I create new ones, I basically get a list of all the different terminals that I've got. But it's not very helpful that it just says bash everywhere. So one of the things I can do is up in the command palette, I can say terminal, rename. And what that'll do is let me name the individual terminals. So if I got a test thing or a build thing or whatever, and I've got it all set up, I can go and name them. So we'll call this cool terminal 1. And you can see now in my terminal, I've got that particular thing named. And so when I switch over another one, I can do cool things like C matrix, and you get the whole matrix inside the terminal, which is really awesome. But there's a few other things that I think are cool. I'm going to go back to the settings file and show you some cool settings you can set for this. So we go to terminal settings. If you've used the terminal and at some point you sort of close the terminal and you get this message that said terminal's closing with error 0 or something like that. Has anybody ever seen that with a terminal? It's just telling you what the error code is. It's coming back from whatever you're running in the terminal. You can actually turn that error message off. I found it not to be very useful. So you can say, hey, turn that particular thing off. We now have the ability to set the font family, font size, weight, and all that in the terminal and in the debug console. So you can configure those however you want. So if for some reason you really like a different font in the terminal, like mono space, you can do that, and it'll change down there, which is nice. We can make it really, really small, which is goofy to do in a big demo, but you get the point. So we'll close that out. The other thing, and probably the most interesting thing, is that you can configure what terminal or what shell to run when you default. So by default, it comes in as the bash shell here on the Mac. But if I can go in here and if I want to say, well, actually, I want the Z shell, the next time I go and create a terminal, I'll actually get the Z shell. Right, so I can control that. If you're on Windows, it's actually even smarter. I can come back, so I'm running Parallels here on my machine, which is going to blow our minds a little bit more as well. So the thing I can do over here on Windows is that, let's just zoom in a little bit. Hey, come back. Sorry about that. We'll zoom in a little bit so everybody can see. On Windows, what you can do, because the location of all the different shells and stuff on Windows is a little bit harder, you can say terminal, select the default shell, and it'll give you a prompt of all the different terminals on your machine. And this one, maybe I want to run in Bash. And then if I come into my settings file inside this Windows instance, you can see that it actually wrote into the settings what shell to use. So you can go and you can customize that inside VS Code. All right, let's go back over to, I can't run the Z shell. It's going to drive me nuts. All right, so let's go back over to VS Code. So that's kind of how you can sort of do some cool things with the terminal. Built in, very nice. Now I want to do is move over to debugging. And so how many people have debugged with VS Code? How many people have found it challenging to configure VS Code to debug? About the same. Okay, that's good. I'm going to show you a few ways to sort of make things a little bit easier. So exit, let's see, where are there's a lot of terminals there. Okay, so I'm going to go here, and I'm going to open up a new folder. So ls, hello. So here's an empty folder. Here's a trick. I can come in here and I say code insiders, open up the current folder, which is dot. And if you press or pass in a -r, that will reuse the current instance of VS Code instead of starting up a new instance of it. So basically, I've created a new instance here. I'm going to create a new file, hello.js, console.log, hello, kind of get the pattern. And that's all I have to do to create a simple JavaScript application. And if I want to debug it, all I have to do is press F5. I don't have to set up any configurations or anything like that. Because VS Code has the ability for extensions to say, hey, if presented with a single file, I know how to debug a Node file or a JavaScript file or a Python file. So extensions can contribute in here and say, I know how to debug this file if you just give that to me. So we can say, hey, it's just a Node file. And when you do that, it just runs the debugger and runs the file. Pretty straightforward, so no configuration. If I set the breakpoint on there, and I say it's a Node app, boom, it'll hit the breakpoint. So that's nice, very simple. So if you had trouble debugging, just press F5. You don't have to do anything there. But if you want to go and configure things, you can come over here to the debug view-let. If you come up here to the top, there's a few things that are going on. The gear here is the thing that lets you start to scaffold out the thing called the launch.json, which tells VS Code how to launch and start the debugger. And so again, extensions can contribute scaffolded or templates for this. So since this is a Node app, I can go and scaffold that out, close this down, and this will go and it'll create the little block that it needs to be able to launch a Node application from scratch. So it'll basically work exactly the same way at this point. We run it, F5, Why aren't you running? Oh, maybe I didn't pick it. Launch. Oh, because I don't have a breakpoint. It was just running all the way through. Got it. There we go. So there, it just simply does what you would kind of expect. But what it did was, in this case, for Node, it actually went and said, hey, I know there's going to be a package.json. It explored inside package.json and figured out what the file was to run. But once you start to configure it, you can do interesting things, like come in here and you press Control Space, and you get a full set of completions that you can go to start to configure the environment and how you want it to work. All right, so that's pretty basic debugging. Let's make it a little bit more interesting. I'm going to go to an Express application. Again, this is Node, and I just happen to be using Node apps because it's built in and it's very simple to go and do. But this works with any language that supports a debugger. So in this case, what we can do is come back over here, and we're going to configure the debugger again. But now you can see that in this type of application, there's a lot more extensions that want to play. So I can do a Chrome debugger, I've got a Docker extension. They're all able to go figure out things that can happen. But we'll say it's a Node application. It figured it out. If we come in here and we press F5, the application will start up. And then we can go to localhost 3000. And there's our Express app. All right, so that was all we needed to do to configure debugging for this Node app. But what we found out was that there's a lot of people that do Node development that don't really start or run with F5. What they do is from the terminal, they come in here and they say node inspect, was it bin dub. And that's how they start up their application. But you notice when I did that from the terminal, the debugger started up at the top. And that's because I have a feature turned on in settings. It's called auto attach. And when you do that, when VS Code sees that a node process started that's debuggable, it'll actually attach to it. And so there's a couple other interesting things in here. If we go to debug area, so that's I have auto attach, that's turned on by default. Another thing that we have here, you can do debug toolbar location floating. And this is sort of the traditional way that it works, but if you come in here and you say, I want it to be docked, the next time that I press F5, whoops, what happened? What happened? Let's try it one more time. F5. Oh, it's not happy. Port 3000 is already in use. Nope. There we go. Yeah, it was already running. But you can see up here, now the debug toolbar is actually docked to the top of the debug view-let. So it stays in a consistent place, and it's maybe not covering up your source files if that's something that gets in the way for you. So you can go and you can configure that in the debugger. Okay, so a couple of other cool things that are going on here. Let's see, we'll stop the debugger. All right, we'll come back here. Now, this is a pretty basic application. I configured it in one way to run for a Node application, but let's say that this was a little bit more of an interesting application like a Docker app. I can come in here and I can say Docker, add Docker files to the workspace. And this is a set of commands that are contributed from the Docker extension. And what this will do is it'll actually set up your application to be run in a Docker container. And once you do that, you can come here and you just say, Docker compose up. And this will go and build a container instance locally on your machine, and it'll spin it up with Docker Compose. But what's interesting about with Docker Compose that it actually starts in this Docker Compose file, it actually starts it with node-inspect. So the instance of Node that's running inside the container expects to be debugged. So if we want to debug this, all we have to do is come over here to our launch.json. I can click on Add Configuration. And you can see these are all the configurations that extensions have contributed to VS Code. So I can come in here, and there's one called Docker attached to Node. That'll go and it'll create that particular instance for me. And then what I can do is I can come in here and I can say, well, actually, I want to run the Docker attached to Node command, or debug configuration. I press play there. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to attach to the running container. And we're going to debug this Node application in the container, not running locally on my machine. And the way that we can kind of prove that is let's go in here to our roots. And I'm going to put a breakpoint in here. And we will, why are you not running again? Did I press stop? Oh, my debug toolbar is over there. That's why. So we're still running. I'm going to press refresh here. And we're going to hit the breakpoint. And to prove that this is actually running in the container at this point is we'll come over to our debug console. And I can come in here and say platform. You see it's actually running in Linux because the Docker container is actually a Linux-based container that we're actually running on. So that's how you can create a couple of interesting configurations for your application. The last thing I want to show is something called compound debugging. So I'm going to open up another application which is even a little more interesting, which is called Tailwind Traders. And this one has a lot more stuff in it. But what's cool about it is that to come here to our launch configuration, it has two things. It has the ability to be debugged on the client using the Chrome debugger and on the server using the Node debugger. So I can start each one of these up independently, or I can come into my launch configuration and I can say, Control space, I can set up a compound configuration. And this is what this is going to do is it's actually going to let me choose multiple configurations to go and launch. All right? So we want to say when we press F5 on this, we want both the Chrome debugger to start up and we want the Node debugger. So we want the client and the server to start at the same time. So we come back over to the debug viewlet, and we pick the compound debugger, and we press play. And what will happen is that we're going to hit the container that's still running from the previous demo. So let me go and stop that container. So that container is from the last time that we debugged. It's still running. It's still listening on port 3000. So that was what happened there. So that should stop. We'll stop and restart this. We'll start up the browser. Boom. And now we're connected both in the client on the client debugger and to the server, which is serving up the Tailwind Traders app, which lets you go and buy garden gnomes, which is awesome. Okay, so that is debugging in a nutshell. And we've got 15 minutes left, which is awesome, perfect. Okay, last thing I want to do here from a debugging perspective is show you something that's about what we call tasks. And so tasks are basically, let me back up just one second. So Visual Studio Code is an editor. It's not an IDE. It's meant to integrate with the rest of your tools, not take all of your tools and put them inside VS Code. But there are tools that you like to run, that you need to run when you're working on your projects, like maybe a less or SAS compiler, or maybe you're doing a build beforehand, which I'll show you in an instance. What you can do is you can create things we call tasks. And tasks basically connect VS Code with all the other tools on your machine. Much the same way as the launch.json configuration file connects your tools, your debug tools together, tasks will connect other things running on your machine together with VS Code. So I've got a few things in this particular app. If I bring up the command palette, I back up, and I type in task, and I press space, you're going to see a number of different tasks that are sort of understood and well-defined in here. And these are basically gulp or npm tasks because it knows that it's in, it has a package.json. So it figures out that, hey, there's a gulp file and a package.json, and there are a bunch of npm things that I can go and run. So I can come up here and I can say, all right, well, I want to run the build task, right? So I'll say I want to run gulp build. And what this can let you do is actually specify the output and how to parse it, but we're not going to get into that today. And so that'll just go and it'll execute that gulp task for me. So I have an easy way to get to it from the command palette. And when I do that, it built it locally, and then I can press F5 and go from there. So that's kind of interesting. It's an easy way to do it, but it's not the easiest way. I have to keep going up to the command palette and type in task and find the one, and then blah, blah, blah. That's a pain. But you see over here on the right-hand side, there's a little gear. If I click on the gear, what's going to happen is it will go and it will create a task.json file for me in the VS Code folder. And it'll scaffold out around that particular task a bunch of things that it can go and do. It says, you know, all right, it's the gulp task. It's going to run the build script. Here's the file to run. The interesting thing, you can come in here again, follows the same pattern, control space, and you'll get a nice list of things you can do. One of the things is called the group. And the group is, you can specify, is this task a build task or is it a test task? You want to create your own group, you can do those things. But if you say it's a build task and it's a default build task, what that'll do is hook it up to the Shift Command B key binding. Right? So I just press that, and then that'll go and it'll execute that task automatically for me. So that's an even quicker way to go and launch that particular task. But that's still, like if I'm building my application, I forget to go and build it, and I start debugging, I miss it. But what I can do, which is even better, this is kind of the gold standard, I can come in here to my launch.json file, and I can say in this particular debug configuration that pre-launch, before I run that particular debug session, I want to run the gulp build task that we just defined over here in task.json, right? And so what that means is when I press F5, we'll just go run the node debugger in this particular case. When I go and run this, you'll see that it'll go and it'll do the build for me. So that every time I go into that loop, but I'm doing a debug session, that I don't have to go and rebuild every single time. So it's a nice way to sort of take the things that happen outside of the tool, like gulp or build or npm, and combine them into key bindings through the command palette or through the debugger. All right, so that, in a nutshell, is a whole bunch of cool tips and tricks for VS Code. And so what I want to do now in the last 10 minutes or so is kind of talk about remote development. So I saw a few hands earlier, people who are doing SSH and containers and Docker. Let me go and switch over, just talk a second to a slide. Let's go down here, clickers through. So we went through all these things, which is awesome. But let's talk about remote development. So one of the things we've been doing over the past few months is looking at sort of what are the developer pain points that are out there. And the common thing that keeps showing up is the inability or the very big challenge of setting up a reproducible development environment. And there's a lot of cases you see that, like, oh, I want to go check out Go, but then I've got to set up Go and Delve and all these different things to go learn how to, you know, get that on my machine, my pristine machine, which is set up for my normal day job. It's hard to go and do, and you kind of go, maybe I'm not going to go do that. I don't know. We see some big companies out there like Facebook who have these mono repos they can't fit on a machine. So everybody at Facebook has a developer VM in the cloud. It's huge. It's massively powerful. They just connect to it from their machine. They develop remotely against that. You see data scientists who need these massive VMs with a bunch of GPUs in the cloud to do models, things like that. And all these cloud-based tools, really what they're doing is making it easier to set up development boxes that are up in the cloud that you can just connect to and work with. But all these experiences kind of have a really bad experience. Like if you're SSHing into a box, either you're going to have to set up like some sort of a file sync operation, or you're going to end up using VI on the other machine, which isn't very fun. Still in those cases, if you're syncing, you have to replicate the context locally so that when you're developing against it, you have the right tools and right stacks so you get IntelliSense and linting and all that stuff just works. Browser-only tooling solutions are good. There's a lot of places where they're interesting, but a lot of people don't want to give up the richness of the desktop. So we thought about it in a slightly different way. We said, you know, if we can make it so that the client tools actually connect and run in the context of the remote machine, then what you get is this rich development experience running locally, but running in the context of that machine. So you don't have to set up that machine. It's just there for you, but you get the full experience. So let me show you what that means. There's a couple of cool things there. Yeah, so the remote development extensions, so we just released these last Wednesday or Thursday. And what we can do is come over here to the extension manager. We're going to look for, this is the trick to this whole thing. You type in remote development in quotes, and you get the two-word search. And you can see all the nice similar icons. The remote development extension pack. What? What? Oh, I'm still on the slides. Yeah, sorry about that. Well, it's much more interesting if you're looking over here. Okay, so if you search for remote development in quotes, you'll get the right search results. We're working on search on the marketplace. It's going to get better. So you can see they all have sort of the same family of icons, which is cool. The remote development extension is an extension pack. So it'll go and install an extension that will connect you over SSH to containers. There's an Explorer that I'll show you, or WSL, and it'll also install a language service for SSH config files. So once I've done that, let me show you what the world looks like now. So I've got over here in Azure, I've got a set of VMs. And these are just simple machines that I've got set up. Some's got .NET Core on it, functions, Go, Node, all that stuff. Now, if I want to go to today, if I come over here to my terminal, if I say SSH, cdias devbox, I am going to go and connect to that machine. So I'm connected to it, right? I'm over here, you name some Linux machine. If I go into the source folder, I'll make this bigger so everybody can see. The source folder, there's nothing in here. I can come in and say vi hello.js, and there I get my awesome VI experience. I can come in here and say console.log, no IntelliSense, slight colorization. So it's a basic experience. I know to do escape WQ, and boom, I've got my file, and I can say node hello, right? So great. That's my development experience against this machine. If I come in here and I look at my version, I'm running Node 11 on this machine. If I get out of here and I run locally, I can see Node version. You see it's a different environment, right? So I don't have Node 11 installed locally. I've got it up on that machine. And so with the extensions of VS Code, we can make this a lot nicer. So I'm going to come up to the command palette. I'm going to say remote SSH, connect to the current window. So the same environment that I'm in, connect it to a host. And what happens is I get a list of all the different hosts that I have, and I'll show you how that comes up in a second. And there's the dev box that we connected to. And now, whoa, that was super fast. There we go. So what you see down here, you saw it very quickly. What happened, there was a little dialog that came up, and it said, hey, we're connecting. And what happens is the extension actually installs a little server on the remote machine, and then it connects to it. And now we're connected to that machine. If we open up a new terminal, hello, you can see I'm on that dev box, right? So if I go to the source folder, there's my hello file, right? So, but I'm working locally in this context. So I can come in here now. On that machine, I can say Code Insiders and reopen this folder on that hello file, right? So it connects again. But now I get all the greatness of VS Code. I get, you know, full IntelliSense, all the goodness there. Oops, semicolon. If I put a breakpoint in here, I can just press F5. And like we saw before, it says what kind of file this? It's a Node file. Boom, it's going to run it, and it's going to hit the breakpoint. but it's being run and debugged in the context of that other machine. I didn't have to set up any remote debugging or anything like that. It's just working over there because the debugger and all the tools are installed over on that side. Okay, so that's sort of interesting. Maybe we can make it a little bit more interesting. If we come over here, here's a new extension that gets installed, a new View-Let. This is the remote SSH View-Let. And what it does is, let me close these down. It gives me access to all of the machines that are listed in my SSH config file. And so I can come in here and click on the gear. There's my SSH config file. There's no magic here. This is the same SSH config file that you would have on your machine set up with public and private keys as you normally do. One of the things we install is a great language service for it. It's a little bit hard to tell the syntax colorization, but again, you can come in here, press Command Space, and you can go and you can edit your SSH config file. So what I can do is come in here, and let's see, we've got an interesting one here. Here's a Python one. I can click on that and say, open that up. It's going to go and it's going to connect to the Python box that I've got running. And you can see here that if we come over and we add a new terminal, we say Python version. We've got version 3.6. That's cool. I open up a Python file. It says, hey, you should install the Python extension. I think that's a really good idea. And so it's going to go and install it. And the interesting thing about this is it doesn't install the extension locally. The extension is actually installed on the remote machine. You see this, it's hard with the Steam to see, but there's a little badge that has the two greater than, less than signs, because the extension is now installed in the context of where it should be, which is on the remote machine. So what that means is I get IntelliSense, I get debugging, all based on that machine. So if we come in here and we say self dot, come on, oh, there it was, self dot. I get full IntelliSense based on the version of Python and the tools that are installed over there. And of course, I can come in here and I can set a breakpoint and press F5, and it's going to run a Python file. But this is a Python node app or web app that's listening on a port on another machine that's not on my local box. So how am I going to debug into this? Well, I know that it's running on port 8000. Another thing that we can do is actually set up port forwarding. So if I do that, I say, yeah, port 8000, what it's listening on, I can give it a name, a friendly name. And now I'm going to be able to tunnel in. So if I go back, we're maximized here. If I go back over to the browser and I say localhost 8000, we're actually going to break in the Python code that's running on this remote VM. Again, no magic remote debugging setup. It's the exact same debug experience as if it was running locally. The only thing that's happening is sort of the UI is being remoted back and forth. All right, so then we can press F5 and our application is running. 8,000, come on, what happened? Well, you saw the breakpoint get hit. Okay, so that's kind of SSH in a nutshell. But there's a couple other things. I've got 2 minutes, which is perfect. A couple other things that we can do is this notion of, so since this is a remote box, basically we're connecting to the remote box and we're able to work in the context of it. What are other instances of things that are like remote boxes? Well, one of them is a Docker container. And one of the problems with with machines, like I said, is it's really hard to get environments set up. But it's easy to create a Docker container that can be what we call a development environment. I'll show you what that means. So I've got a folder in here. We're going to go into VS Code, remote, we'll try Python again. And we're going to open this up in VS Code. We'll reuse the folder. And so now what we're doing, this is a local folder on this machine, but it's going to give me a prompt right away. It says the folder contains a dev container configuration file. Do you want to reopen it? We'll reopen it in a second. Let me show you what it means with a dev container configuration file. So we've got this folder here. It's called dev container. And then there's a little JSON file in here. You can see the pattern of VS Code. There's a JSON file that kind of tells the tool what to go and do. It says, hey, you know what? For this particular workspace, this development workspace, use this Docker file and open up this particular port and install this extension in that workspace or in that container. And there's the Docker file for it. It's just a simple, straightforward Python Docker file. It installs some tools like Pylint, and it runs pip on the requirements.txt file, and that's it. All right? So I don't have, I have Python on this machine, but it's version 2.7 because that's what comes with the Mac. So if we come back up here and we sort of follow that prompt before, we say remote, containers, reopen folder in container. So that's going to reopen it. It's going to say, yep, look at that dev container JSON file and figure out what to do, which is to go spin up that Docker instance. And when it does that, it will spin up, and then it will connect to it. And there we go. Now we're connected to it. And if we come back in here into our Python file, and we type in app dot, I'm not getting IntelliSense on that one, app dot, well, you get the point. You would get IntelliSense on that. But what I can do is I can set a breakpoint again, and I press F5, and it's going to run in the context of the container, not of the machine that I'm on. In fact, if I open up a terminal, you can come in here and you can say Python version, and it's version 3.7. What we have is running locally is 2.7. All right, so that's how you can set up a container and work in that context. And the third thing that we have, which is basically the same concept if you look at it over what we've been doing, is the notion of WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux. All right, so now I'm over here on Windows, back over on Windows, and I actually have the Windows subsystem installed. And let's create a new terminal, which I think I set up for WSL before, earlier in the demo. Yep, there we go. So now I'm in the Windows subsystem for Linux on Windows, running in parallels. It's like two mirrors pointing at each other. It's very mind-blowing. And I can come in here and I can see here's my particular folder. If we go in, I think I have a source folder here. No, source folders, major source. And we can go into source, and we can do the same thing. Code insiders, and reuse this folder. And now, on the Windows side, we're going to have VS Code running, but it's going to be connected to the Windows subsystem for Linux, that Linux installation. And then I can go and start to do programming against it in that context as if I was connected to a remote machine or connected to a container on my machine. And with that, we are out of time. So just one last slide for everybody to see. Again, these are all online, but there's a whole set of awesome links. Take a picture of it, get the slides, download it. If you have questions, let us know. Tweet us @code. It's the coolest Twitter handle ever. Really easy to remember. Go try out the remote extensions. One thing, it does require the insiders build today. You can install that side by side with Stable, and in a couple weeks, Stable will be out and I'll have full support for the remote stuff. So thank you very much.